Hi, my name is Herveline Auguste. I'm a junior civil engineering student, and I'm here with Sherrie Ann Martin, a Villanova alumni. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So I'm Sherrie Ann. I graduated from Villanova in 2009 with a, degree in chemical engineering. And then from there, I started working at Merck. So I've been at Merck since '09. I've had various jobs as I've been at Merck. My current job is I am leading the technical operations team that supports our lyophilization operations area. So that particular manufacturing area is where we manufacture a lot of the vaccines that babies receive, like MMR. So it's a challenging job, but I love it. It's a lot of fun. I also went back to Villanova and completed my master's in chemical engineering, which I completed in 2015.
Wow, great, great. So do you want to go a little bit into more detail about your job and your industry and what got you started in that?
Yeah, sure, sure. So when I was at school at Villanova, I knew I wanted to do research, but like research is a broad bucket, right? Like there's that entails a lot of things, which I don't think I appreciated when I was at Villanova. Like I just thought research was one thing. So I had the opportunity to a research project, and it was great. It was a really interesting and cool project. But I couldn't see myself necessarily doing that like for the rest of my life, like as my career, you know.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like I had a little panic mode, you know, because it's senior year. Like I said, I graduated in '09, so that's like the peak of the recession, and so it was already hard to find jobs, and then to like be unsure about what I wanted to do just like threw me off. But through Villanova, I got connected to an alum actually, and she lived in New York, and she came down to Villanova. She met with me. She like helped calm me down, and she just reassured me. She's like, you know what? Like, I understand at this stage, this seems like the biggest decision of your life. She's like, but just trust the process and it'll work out, you know? And it was hard to embrace that at the time because she was right. That's like kind of the biggest decision I had to make in my life at that point. But she was right. And so, I just started to take stock of what was important to me, you know, and I knew I wanted to have a job where I felt intentional about it and that there was a purpose beyond just like, you know, clocking in, clocking out type of thing. And so I started looking into different companies. And when I came across Merck, the thing that I loved the most was just the culture, you know, and a big part of what Merck pushes forward is that what we do is for the patient. And that just like resonated with me. And so I started to really pursue opportunities at Merck, which is how I landed my first job, which I tell everyone, it's not necessarily a job that I think I would have picked out per se, you know, like I'm not much of an equipment person. And that role, it was validation. So it's very equipment focused. But I kid you not, that was so instrumental to my career and like even where I am now, because it's not an opportunity that I would have pursued, but I learned so much through that. And I learned so much about our equipment, about our processes, about just Merck and connecting with all kinds of different groups. And so through that opportunity, I started to, you know, expand my network. And then in expanding my network, I learned about new jobs. And so I kind of, you know, had some progression and changes with my career. And ultimately, I ended up finding a job in research that was like what I had envisioned when I was at school. So it was like the research bucket that like I was longing for. I just didn't necessarily know it existed. And so I think it was 2016 is when I moved into our research group, which was an awesome opportunity. At that stage, I was supporting vaccine drug product formulation development as well as process development. So the first product I worked on was actually the Ebola vaccine. So that's manufactured in
Yeah.
Germany. So I got to go to Germany like all the time. I had like the best frequent flyer miles when I was working that project because I was just back and forth. But again, it was really cool. And it goes back to like how I even got started at Merck because we all remember what it was like when Ebola was like so scary for everyone, and it was spreading like wildfire. And so to be involved in a project that the impact, like you are seeing on the news all the people that are contracting and dying from this, and to be a part, no matter what your role is, to be a part in distributing a vaccine that could help curb that was just an amazing opportunity. So I spent about 3 years in that research group, and I supported some other vaccine candidates as well. And then, like I said, last year, I then switched over to the group that I'm in now. And so in this particular group, we do a lot of things to support the operation for our lyophilized vaccines, continuous improvements, things to help us operate more efficiently. We're dealing with live virus vaccines. So you're constantly checking for degradation rates, and things change with time. And so we have to adjust and do a lot of process monitoring. We work in a heavily regulated industry, so constantly staying on top of that and making adjustments as needed. So it's a broad array of things that we do in my group. But I love it. I really, really enjoy it. I love the culture. I love the people that I work with, but I also love just what I am doing itself.
Wow. That sounds really, really rewarding. I know you said that you got to travel and you get to see how your work impacts other people's, especially like looking at the news and stuff. If you had to pick one thing that's your favorite part of the job or most rewarding part of the job, what would you say?
It's definitely, I kid you not, it's definitely that like patient focused part. And it's something like with my team that I constantly, like every one of our staff meetings, I always try to like incorporate that into what we talk about, because I think it really is important. Like, as I said, I'm not gonna lie, the job can be challenging,
Mhm.
and there's times where you're just like, man, how are we gonna solve this? Or like,
Yeah.
you were like burning that midnight oil, and to just take that step back, and it's like, wait a minute, let's like not lose sight of the bigger picture. You can't imagine like how that gives you energy back.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I love is at our site, you walk into the manufacturing buildings, and there are posters that like fellow coworkers put up of their kid when they received one of our vaccines. And on the
Oh,
poster, it says, like a little blurb, picture of the kid, a little blurb about, the date that they got their vaccine and stuff. But then it lists all of the operators that were involved in the manufacture of that. And that has such a big impact, because that guides real, like when you remember, I'm not making this for just some arbitrary, like this is going to my coworkers or maybe even my own kids. That really impacts and influences the energy you approach your work with, the decisions that you make. It has such a huge impact.
yeah.
So for sure, that is my favorite thing about what I do.
Thanks for sharing that. That's incredible that you really see the impact of your job and your work.
Hmm.
Um, I know you said there are some technical challenges within your job. Do you want to elaborate on that? As
Yeah,
well as
yeah.
some of the non-technical challenges?
Sure, sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, from the technical challenges, and it's broad, it changes, and sometimes it's day to day. But for instance, we support manufacturing, and so at the stage where we are, final formulation and filling, our batches are really expensive, and so there can be things that are literally happening on the floor which will make or break our opportunity to then make the batch, right? And so when you're in those situations where there's so much on the line and you got to make a decision really fast, but you need to make the right decision, it's a challenge. So those kind of things come up on the daily. So even today, for instance, um one of our really critical pieces of equipment just went down. And like I said, this will make or break us being able to fill. And you don't have a large time frame, because once you commit certain materials, they only have so long before you have to discard them. And so it just was all hands on deck, trying to figure out like how can we solve this problem? And I think all of us go into engineering because we like problem solving. It was like a big
Yeah.
puzzle, so a big puzzle with a lot of stakes, but I mean, that's what I'm saying though. It's fun, but it's challenging, um we ended up having to call even someone that like moved to one of our other sites, but just to get some insights from him. So it's those sort of things, we had another thing, and we had to do a whole lot of troubleshooting, and this was with one of our lyophilizers. So we're starting to think about, like all the stuff that we talk about in school. We're thinking about the heat transfer rates and doing that sort of modeling. We're talking about, the vapor pressure, and trying to think about, okay, well, what would the impact be then if we're at this pressure, and all sorts of things that are just like pulling from stuff that we learn about, and and you guys are learning about now at school, to solve these problems like real time, so that way we don't have major impact. So those are some of like the urgent things that come up. But then there's times too where it's maybe not as pressing, but it's more so setting us up for success. So for instance, for our longevity of one of our franchises, we really thought through how can we change our process so that way we can ensure that we can continue to manufacture and get out the number of doses that we need to amidst all the other competing activities that we have going on, and really had to reimagine what is that process going to look like? What are some big changes that we can make to it, take into account the product? So that was something that is not something that I need to solve like yesterday, but it was big in scope, it's still, and again, a challenging project, but fun still, because we all love our problem solving.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I think it's really important to know like the challenges, but as well as the good things as part of a job. Like, there's ups and downs to every profession.
Mm-hmm.
So you talked about how you went from research to manufacturing. How did that help you advance in your career, and what would you have done differently maybe?
So the things that I liked was that I started off in manufacturing and then I went over to research.
Okay.
And not everyone has to take that track. A lot of people don't. A lot of people actually start off in research and kind of stay there. But I found it helpful because I touched the actual process. Like I knew what it was like on the operations floor. I knew what this big equipment looked like. So kind of similar to, in school, you're reading about a lot of processes and about, you're going through a lot of things in theory, but there's something about them when you go into the lab, right? And you're actually applying it and it just clicks like that. So it's kind of the same principle. Like I had that actual experience. So then when I went over to research, I was able to conceptualize things a little bit better. It was less theoretical and it was more real to me. So I'm definitely glad that that was the trajectory that I took. And then now going back to manufacturing, I see just how I think about things differently, having that research experience compared to like before I went over there. Because when you are designing the process from scratch, there's so many studies that you have to do to really understand the impact. Like the smallest thing that we take for granted, you realize when you're in that group, all the different factors that can really impact your end product. And so now that I'm in this group, I still have that mentality. So when we're talking about changes, so the example I gave about us thinking about changing our process, right? I'm able to think about, okay, well, these are all the risks that this could pose. These are the studies that we need to do. Here's how to design said studies, drawing from all of that, the experiences that I gained when I was in research and starting with the process from scratch really helps even when you have a developed process.
Okay, thanks. So you talked about your career development. I'm just going to take it back to when you were at Villanova. What was your most memorable thing about Villanova?
Oh my gosh. So many things. You know what? Honestly, it's like the people, like obviously we're at school to learn, and that's like a given. You can't miss that part.
Yeah.
But it's the people, and there's no other time like college, like when else are you living and eating and working with the same group of people who happen to be your friend? Like it just that it's once in a lifetime type
Yeah.
of thing. And so that is the stuff that, like, when I think back to my Villanova days, it's always those like memories that I had with people, and my friends. So when I was at school, I had this really, really tight group of girlfriends, and we were all in, different schools, like some of them were in science and some in engineering, some in, the liberal arts. But we still would study together. And I remember like junior year, because junior year is like kind of the most challenging,
Yeah.
and we just like, we would have these study nights, and we would just be so kind of like giddy delusional. It's like it's midnight and your like brain is fried, but you're still
Oh
going.
yeah.
But we would just have these fun times, like sometimes like in the library or wherever we were. And it was just because we were together. And even though we weren't necessarily working on the same project or whatever, it was that being together and working through it and just like kind of having that kind of fun. So those memories definitely stick out, like at the time, all you can think about is like, oh man, this class is so hard or whatever like that. But
Yeah.
once you leave school, it's like those relationships that you cultivate and like those experiences that you have are like what are the most fun.
Yeah. Sounded like you had a really great time at Villanova.
I did, and it's the people though. It's like it's really the people that make that, and especially when you have that good close like core group of friends, I think that makes a
Mhm.
huge difference and was really what I enjoyed the most about my time at Villanova.
Okay. Can you hold on just a second? I'm gonna just pause the recording.
Mhm.
Okay. So it sounds like you had a really positive experience at Villanova. So what would you change something if you could, or tell yourself back then?
Mm. What would I tell myself back then? I think probably not to stress so much. And even going back to what I shared about even just figuring out like my career path, like just everything seemed like such a critical issue, which go looking back, it wasn't. I mean, it required thought, but wasn't necessarily as big as I had made it in my mind. And it's hard to keep that perspective, like hindsight's 2020. But if there's any like encouragement I can give, it's just to, be mindful of the decisions that you're making, but recognize that like you really have like your whole future ahead of you. And there's not, you know, some of these smaller decisions that are coming up are not going to change your whole trajectory forever, even though it felt like that at the time,
Yeah.
I think back to a lot of things that I would like overly stress and get worried about. And it's like, I didn't need to. Um, and I think the other thing is it's amazing, but like there's so many aspects of what you learn at school that are important for your career. And it's obviously, our engineering, we're going into engineering roles, so we have to be strong there. But so many other things outside of that, like even with the liberal arts, I know that a huge part of what has helped me be successful at work is having that strong like liberal arts backing, the ability to write well and clearly and to be able to present well and to even think outside of just the engineering realm, but think about other implications, whether it's like ethically or whatever the case may be, to be able to see things from another person's perspective. All of those other traits are really important. When you get into the work world, you realize like how valuable that side of our education really is. So not to lose sight of that part either. Like we're in engineering, those classes are, predominant for your curricula, but the other classes that you're taking, they definitely are important too.
Yeah, I definitely feel that because nowadays some students feel like, oh, career compass, why do I have to do this? But in the back of our minds, we know it's important to have those professional skills as well as some of the liberal arts classes, because some of my professors said, like, back when they were in college, they only had a few general electives, not as much as we have now, that
Yeah.
like expand our knowledge and our perspective. Yeah. So one last question. Well, I might have a few more questions, but this is the last one I have written down. Where do you see yourself going forward, or like in a few years?
That's such a good question. And it's something that honestly evolves because um, for the longest time, actually, I really thought that the next trajectory I was going to take was to get my MBA and then pursue something maybe more along the business route. And then when I went to to our research group, um, it just reinforced how much I really love the sciences and being in a technical role. And so where I see myself in the future is still very much like science focused and engineering focused, but on a broader scope, you know? So like, for instance, right now I'm supporting a particular product franchise, you know, so whether it was more on a global scope or something like that, to be able to influence the overall strategy, but especially with a technical focus. Um, the thing that I know that I really love is leadership. I think it's really cool to be able to influence culture. And
Yeah.
so I definitely want to remain in positions where I have that opportunity. You know, going in and even thinking about diversity, I think it's so important to have diversity and representation in all different levels of leadership, you know, because it shapes just how we approach things. You know, we all have different perspectives and different things that we bring to the table. And so having that, I think is really valuable. And I get excited by the opportunity to be able to really instill that, to really push forward a message about inclusion, you know, like diversity 100% is important, but it's actually doesn't matter if we're not being inclusive. We can check all the boxes we want, but if we're not being inclusive, well, what is it gaining us, you know? And so being able to influence that and make that very much a part of the culture is something that I really love. And so just being in positions to continue to push that forward, I really, that's where I see myself.
That's great. Oh my gosh, that's so inspirational. Um, yeah, because I know I don't know where I'm gonna be in 10 years or so, but I'm praying it's somewhere great.
Exactly. And you know, something I always say to people, like especially when I'm having like development conversations, it is good to have that long-term plan. But I think what's most important is to really just understand what it is that you really value, you know, like what are the things that excite you about your work, and what are the things that you love and are passionate about, and then what are the things that you want to continue to develop. And maybe that will help you build even a 2-year or 3-year plan, and that's okay. You know, if it because it's iterative, right? Like I said, I always thought that my plan was MBA and then business focused, and then it changed because your development will be iterative. But I think if you have that foundation of knowing this is what I value and what's important to me, as well as, and these are the skill sets or the opportunities that I want to gain, I think that that can really help kind of influence and shape what those next steps look like for you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because as a junior, that was really inspirational, especially since you didn't know what you were going to do, but then you found your path and you seem to really love it, and you're really making an impact. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's, you know, just to reinforce that message, you know, there's really no opportunity that is like a lost opportunity. Even if it's something that you just learn, I don't like this, that's still important to know. And you can learn from everything. And I think it's just the mindset that you take into what you're doing. If you go into it with like, hey, I may not love this, but I'm still learning from it, it's going to have more impact on you, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I try to use everything as a learning experience.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's all I have.
Okay.
Thanks for answering my questions.
Yeah, thank you.